Hello everybody, bit of a video special for you this afternoon. We now know the 12th team in Super League in 2021. That will be the Leigh Centurions, who beat 5 other teams to the crown. The independent panel, 7 people, all unanimously agreed that the Centurions were the strongest team. We're going to have a natter about it now. Joining me, Matt Shaw, I've got Gareth Walker, Paul Bennett, Martyn Sadler. Martyn, I'll come to you first. Leigh in Super League, what are your initial thoughts on that decision?
Well, I'm not surprised, Matthew. I wrote an article about 3 weeks ago in League Express, when it was first announced that this would be the process, and we got the names of the applicants. I think Leigh looks stronger all round, than the others. They've got a great stadium. They've got a squad that's pretty near to being competitive at the moment. They've got good support. I think they averaged over 6,000 when they were last in Super League. And they've got an owner who will plug the financial gap. I mean, they're only going to get £1 million a year, probably, obviously, about 600,000 less than the other Super League clubs next year. But I think Derek Beaumont is a very determined guy, and I think he will plug the gap, of that funding. So I think they'll be a very competitive side. And I think there's no certainty whatsoever that they're going to be the relegated club next year.
Paul, is it the right choice? Is it the safe choice, the sensible choice? What do you think this is?
It's the choice that I expected, for sure. I think safe is the word, Matt. The whole process comes with a bit of sadness for me that we've lost a foothold in one of the major cities in North America, and I guess we've traded it for a second team in the borough of Wigan. And that comes from somebody who's from the borough of Wigan, so no disrespect to the borough of Wigan. But in terms of the image of the sport outside, I thought the only choice that would have salvaged Super League's reputation in terms of being expansive and ambitious would have been Toulouse. That would have been my own personal preference, but I understand why they've not been picked. I think Super League... I think it's potentially in danger of putting out an image that we are consolidating, that we're looking inwards, that we're sort of taking a step backwards. But that is the reality of the situation. So in that context, I think Leigh is absolutely the right choice for all the reasons that Martyn just mentioned. You've got a stadium that's ready. You've got a fan base that will turn out and will, crucially for the other clubs, go to away games as well in decent numbers. You've got obviously a team with great history. You've got a team, I think, that can actually be quite competitive and has been competitive in the Championship for a number of years. Also in Super League, when they came up, they didn't finish bottom. So they've got a track record of giving it a good go. They've got an owner, as Martyn says, who's not afraid to put his money where his mouth is, and that's going to be needed with the 1 million distribution. So it seemed the obvious choice to me, given the criteria that Super League were looking for. And I know there was a little bit of, I guess, conspiracy theories about Bradford, and we looked, didn't we, at the criteria, and it did seem to be suited to them. Perhaps that was just for them to get involved in this whole process. But for me, Leigh was the standout one, with no disrespect intended to any of the others.
We'll talk about the other runners and riders in a bit. Gareth, short term, was this the decision that had to be made? As Paul said, there's been all the criteria that have been listed. We still don't know what the weighting of it all, but can we assume now that, given Leigh have got in, and I think everyone would agree they've got the strongest squad, has their on-field merits, their on-field prospects for 2021 ultimately sealed them a Super League place, or is that doing their bid an injustice?
Perhaps a bit of an injustice, because I do think they fulfil a lot of the rest of the criteria in terms of facilities. We've talked about crowd, I had a look at the League Express yearbook before we came on, and there was games where there was 8,000-9,000 people there. And while I understand absolutely this argument about outside perception of the game when you're going from Toronto Wolfpack to Leigh, I guess the flip side of that is when you put the TV cameras at Leigh on a Friday night in front against Wigan, and last time they beat Wigan in Super League, didn't they? The perception of people to watching that game would be pretty positive because they create a fantastic atmosphere there. And that looks good for the sport. I think their on-field position definitely helps, as both Martyn and Paul have said. Having Derek Beaumont there will help bridge that gap that they've got with the central funding and the other clubs. And I think it's interesting. Obviously, this decision's been made by an independent panel. If it was the clubs voting on this, I don't think they'd have voted for Leigh Centurions, because I think they're a dangerous side to come in. And all those teams in the bottom half now be looking over the shoulders and thinking, if Derek Beaumont throws some more money at this, an already strong squad, they're going to be very, very competitive, I think, in that bottom half of Super League and maybe beyond next year.
Well, Derek said that he's going to bring the confetti cannons back out, the fireworks. Hopefully we get to see that Rod Stewart tribute act again, because that was a personal favourite during that 1 year in Super League. Martyn, one thing I want to ask, and I'm putting it to you all here, but we'll go to Martyn first. When it was announced it was going to be a 12th team, one of the things he said, Robert Elston said in his media briefing, we have to look at what's going to benefit Super League in the medium to long term in making this choice. We have to look at the benefits of the medium and long term. So to open it up, Martyn, what does this say about Robert Elston's image for Super League, that it's Leigh Centurions ultimately? And it's worth noting Elston wasn't on the 7-man panel, but what does it say about where they see Super League going, given that Leigh are the team that have come up?
Well, you've got to link Leigh coming in with Toronto going out. And I think the message of Toronto was an absolutely horrible message for Rugby League. It's quite remarkable that Rugby League in its history has pioneered so many things that it then abandoned and allowed other sports to take advantage of. And, for example, Paris Saint-Germain, when we actually got the Paris Saint-Germain club to add its name to Super League, I don't think many people in this country know how big that was, really, how big a club Paris is in France. And then to abandon it, as we did after 2 years, was just utter madness as far as I'm concerned. And I feel the same about Toronto. And the one common factor, oddly enough, is that Robert Elston was involved with Paris Saint-Germain in 1997. And it was again Robert who pulled the plug in 2020 on Toronto. So I think what we'll see now in Toronto is the Toronto Arrows Rugby Union Club probably go from strength to strength, as Rugby Union did in Paris after Rugby League set down the template. And it's the same old story, unfortunately. So I still feel very angry about Toronto going out. But that's nothing to do with Leigh Centurions. Leigh Centurions, I'm a great admirer of Derek. I'm a great admirer of Leigh Centurions as a club. I think they deserve this particular opportunity. Obviously, Leigh isn't a major city in North America, but it does have a fantastic history in Rugby League. They've been the Rugby League champions. They've won the cup in years gone by. They've got a great history. And I don't think we should denigrate Leigh in any way, shape or form, because I think they will be an asset to Super League next year, as Paul says, in terms of, crowds visiting other clubs. I think they'll do a great job. But I also agree with Gareth's point. Any other club that thinks the upcoming club is going to be a cert for relegation, I think they've got another thing coming, because I don't think Leigh might get relegated at the end of the year, but it's by no means a certainty. And, it wouldn't surprise me if it was somebody else. So certainly the clubs, if it had been left to the clubs as the Toronto decision, this is the crazy thing, isn't it? The Toronto decision was made by the clubs. If that decision had gone to this independent panel, I suspect that the decision might have been quite different, and that Toronto wouldn't have been thrown out at all. I'm only speculating there.
Well, who would the clubs have wanted, Paul? Who would the clubs have wanted to come up?
I think very simply the club that would bring the most away fans, more than anything. And
Bradford.
Probably say that's Bradford. But equally, Leigh don't have a bad travelling spot. And I think Featherstone, especially because Featherstone haven't been in Super League for so long, ever. They've not been in Super League, have they? They've not been in top flight for so long. They would have been a grand sort of Super League tour for them. I think their fans would have been delighted to go absolutely every single game. And so I think either of those would have worked just as well, if not better, than Leigh. And I think Gareth maybe alluded to earlier that if you're going to be cynical about it, they might have picked a club like Bradford or Featherstone that maybe doesn't have quite as competitive a squad, just to guarantee that they would go down.
It's going to be interesting now, though, isn't it? Because we know what Derek is like. He will spend some money. He was happy to be linked with Benji Marshall earlier in the year. They said they'd touch base with him. So what's he going to do now? You can imagine all the other clubs are going to be terrified of the headlines coming out that they're linked with X, Y, and Z. It's going to. You would think, Gareth, that a few clubs who you would suspect are going to be near the bottom are going to be quite uneasy at Derek's spending power and the possibility of the players that he could bring in to further strengthen what, to be fair, is already a fairly strong squad.
Yeah, definitely. I think they're dangerous, aren't they? I think that's the word. They are dangerous to all those clubs who might think they're fighting against relegation next year. And what it seems from afar is that this whole process has reignited a bit of a fire in Derek Beaumont again now. And we saw him speaking on television soon after the decision. And I think this challenge now, I think he said that their aim ultimately was to be in Super League in 2022. And he said that challenge has got more difficult because now they'll have to stay up rather than get promoted. But you get the impression that he's relishing that challenge. And I think they probably will be linked with a few star names. They've got a good squad already with plenty of Super League experience. John Duffy's an interesting one, isn't he? He's been the highly rated coach for years and years from when he was working at Swinton and Featherstone. And now he's got a chance all of a sudden as a Super League head coach. So how will he deal with that and these players? And, he plays an expansive, exciting style of rugby generally, John Duffy. So that'll be interesting to watch. So I think it's going to shake the whole thing up at the bottom half of Super League next year. And I understand people's reservations about the decision, and there will be criticism. We knew that whoever it was decided it would be. But I think on the field, it's going to make it exciting in Super League next year.
Right, 3, 2, 1. Go to all of you. Which club can feel hardest done by to not be named the Super League club for next year? Martyn.
Well, I think probably Toulouse. I think Toulouse have a lot of strengths that are actually quite similar to Leigh's strengths in terms of squad, stadium. The organisation is a very strong organisation. I just think that obviously what they can't bring is away support, as we've been talking about already. And of course, there's a bit of uncertainty still with the COVID situation, which could have actually, it could still play some havoc with the early weeks of the season. And I suspect that I don't know for sure, but I suspect that Toulouse might have been the second in line. And I think now they're probably the strong favourites to be promoted from the Championship in 2021.
Yeah, Toulouse definitely for me. I said at the start that they would have been my choice in an ideal world. I think they're the strongest bid if you considered absolutely everything. I think they've got huge potential, but they've also got facilities there already. They've got a history of rugby league in an expansion area. I feel that Toulouse Catalans being in the same division would be a plus for Super League.
It would.
And the only positive perhaps for Toulouse is that they don't get promoted at late notice with only £1 million funding. And as Martyn says, they possibly are the favourites for the Championship next year. And it might actually suit them to win the Championship and come up on equal footing in a year's time rather than now when they're, well, as I see it, being set up to fail.
Gareth?
Yeah, I agree with those guys. I think Toulouse were that next cab off the rank. I think just speaking generally now, I just hope those 5 clubs, I think they've all done pretty well in generating some kind of public positivity around their clubs again. And this process has got clubs talking about what their strengths are and why we are good. And that's something that Rugby League gets wrong a lot of the time. We're quite often not good at saying what our strengths are. And I think all the clubs have been pretty decent at that the last few weeks. You look at a York and they've creating all kinds of attention on them, and people are saying, York are a Super League club in waiting, and that process will have helped all 5 of them. So I hope all 5 can start next year's Championship on the front foot. And obviously only one can go up, but hopefully they're all on that upward trajectory. And I think the same said of the League One clubs that went through the process for the Championship. I think it is quite a positive experience just because it gets those clubs to say, this is what's good about us, this is what we're doing well, perhaps this is what we might need to do a bit better, but that's all beneficial, hopefully. And I hope that happens. And I also hope, I don't see why they don't open up this process completely transparently now. You know, we've had an insight into what the criteria was. But if there are written reports of why they chose Leigh over the others, I don't see any harm in publicising that. You know, Leigh published their report, didn't you? Their application day by day over the last couple of weeks. You know, let's have a look at why these 5 clubs were all potential Super League clubs and get a bit more positivity. And then people at least can see what the process has been, what everyone's strengths were, what they need to do next. And let's get it all out in the open, be transparent and be positive about it.
They've said they've wanted to do that throughout, but the issue is they haven't wanted to be too transparent, have they? Because when they were asked to what the weighting criteria was, they didn't want to answer it. So will they do it on this? I don't know. I see the point that it might leave them open to be shot at. I do understand that, but
I can understand that, but people are taking shots now, aren't they? And saying, you know, I mean, everybody's social media on here will be filled with the same sort of stuff. Where, you know, why not them? Why these? And you know, this. At least if you did publicise the findings and the exact, you know, they said that it was a unanimous decision to bring Leigh in, and there are 7 people there, 3 from the RFL, 3 from Super League, an independent guy chairing it. So, you know, it's not all, it wasn't stacked in their favour from the start. You know, let's just learn why it was unanimous, why Leigh's was the best bid, what was good about the other bids, and why we can all look forward to next year, you know, whichever of those 6 clubs you are.
A club I'm going to make a case for is York. They were certainly the people's choice. If you looked at all the polls on social media, they were the team that were coming out on top on the vast majority of the polls. I guess the one thing for York maybe, they had one fantastic season, an unbelievable season on and off the field. Their attendance has shot up, the interest in the club, the social media, everything like that was fantastic. Have they been punished by COVID in the fact that they haven't been able to back up that trajectory, that upward curve in their club's stature this year? And as a result, they have ultimately been judged on one outstanding season. I'll put that to you first, Martyn.
Well, I think that's probably true. I mean, all the clubs outside Super League have been punished by COVID. There's no doubt about it. But I think York, certainly of all the 6 clubs, York had a fantastic social media campaign. They've shown real creativity, I think, in what they've done. And, you know, if they can actually link that to performances on the field, I think they've got a tremendous future. But I also think in their case, and it's true of Bradford probably and London Broncos and Featherstone, that this was probably a race in which it was better to come second. Because, you know, I think York are quite a long way from having a squad at the moment that could compete in Super League. And with the best will in the world, they couldn't really recruit a squad, I don't think, in the time that they'd have available. I think what York have done is enthuse a lot of people probably in that city who are their natural supporters. Of course, they've got to play their first game in their new stadium. I've been to the new stadium, incidentally, and I would advise all of you to go and have a look at it. It's absolutely fantastic. John Flatman, the club owner, showed me around it, and it really is a terrific facility. And I can't wait to watch a game there. I think York are going to have a fantastic season in the Championship, and I think they'll be far better off in the Championship, personally, this year than this coming year than they would have been in Super League, because I don't think they would have competed. And I think it would have been disappointing to be playing in that stadium and having a succession of heavy defeats by clubs like St Helens, Wigan and Leeds and so on and so forth, which I think would have probably been inevitable. It's much better for them to be playing against, you know, teams like Sheffield Eagles, Newcastle Thunder. Well, we've not talked about Newcastle coming into the Championship, which I think is a great move. But I'm actually looking forward to the Championship at least as much, if not more, than Super League in 2021. And I'm sure that goes for you, Gareth. You're a great Championship guy. I really can't wait to see how the Championship unfolds next year.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think this process has added to it because, like I said, I think those 5 clubs have spent the last few weeks saying what's good about them and why people should go and watch them and why people, you know, should get behind them and they are potential Super League clubs. So Right, and obviously there'll be disappointment today from all of them, and that's understandable. But let's use all the good stuff that they've done the last few weeks and take that into 2021, which it's a massive game for the sport. We need to get everybody back on board at every level of the sport, watching the game again. Hopefully, when we're all allowed to go to the stadiums together again, and this can be part of that, reinvigorating the sport in 2021. Hopefully.
And to be honest, I was just going to say, excusing Leigh, I think they're all better off not being in Super League, because like I said, with York, they've had one great season, but they needed. What good would it have done for them to go up? And I know that they thought they could be competitive, and maybe they could have been, but they wouldn't have had the success they did last year. That's inevitable. How would that have affected their momentum? Would it have done Featherstone? Would it have done London? Would it have done Bradford any good to go up, probably get relegated and come back down? I'm not sure it does. Leigh probably did need the promotion. Toulouse arguably did, but maybe they'll be better off, as you said, Paul, getting in the right way, so to speak, and having the chance to build a squad properly for it, rather than on less money and less time. I just wonder if they're all actually better off being in that competition anyway.
Yeah, I think they absolutely are. The only argument that you would say for getting into Super League while you have the chance is that if this situation were to arise again, and the Championship were to be voided, or promotion and relegation were to be scrapped again for another year, you'd already be in. You'd be locked in. You'd be safe.
Don't start that conspiracy.
Don't start
that already.
I'd say it's unlikely because the vaccine's been rolled out. Hopefully, fingers crossed, everything's going to be fine, and we'll have a full season. But that would have been the only issue worth considering for me. I think you're right. Generally, I think those clubs are better off in the Championship, building, trying to earn promotion when you get the full handout. For York, more than any of them, I think this was an exercise in laying out ambition, saying that we are a club that is trying to get in Super League, and we want to be in Super League. And going into the new stadium, hopefully for next season, they can build some momentum with that. They can genuinely go out and say, listen, we attempted to get in Super League, and that is our goal. Come and be part of that journey. On the point of them being the People's Club, I would say nobody hates York. You have to
maybe that's it.
York are very likable club as a city. They don't have a local rivalry or a long history of being hated by someone. So I take that with a pinch of salt. But sure, I think they've definitely earned some goodwill out of this, and hopefully they can capitalise on that next year.
To go to the opposite end, the elephant in the room throughout the process has been Bradford. Conspiracy theories running rife. I must admit to be one who bought into that a little bit. I owe a few people beers and lost bets now. But the Bulls, look, they did have the fan base. The market size element of it, you would have to say that they came out on top of. But could they, Gareth? Could they have put Bradford in? Surely they could. It just seemed to me that they just couldn't put Bradford in because of the response and the reaction they would have got.
Yeah, and I thought that right from the start. I think we had a few conversations about when obviously you did that great story on Total RL about all the criteria and how it did seem to fit Bradford. And then I was starting to think, well, hang on a minute, it does seem to look that way. But my initial gut reaction was it has to be too soon in their, whatever you want to call it, going through at the moment, their kind of rebirth and moving forward again to go up to Super League. But to me, Bradford, more than anyone, would benefit from publicising what they put together. Because we've not heard from Nigel Wood since he's been involved in Bradford. I think one criticism of that whole regime has been they've not properly laid out to their own supporters, what exactly is happening with certain things, where they want to go. Open up their application. Let's see what their plans are, what they think they can do with Bradford Bulls again. I think that would be really beneficial to them and create some goodwill with their own supporters as they do look to rebuild that club.
In terms of the criteria seeming to be weighted to suit Bradford, I think perhaps that was the case just to get them involved in the process. Maybe you could say that actually it wasn't an attempt to frame the criteria so they get in, but so that they could be considered. And so an element of what I was just saying about York and what Gareth was saying there, just about the potential to take this application process and make something positive to capitalise on for next year. So maybe Bradford just wanted to be part of the conversation to say, listen, we're serious about getting back to Super League. There's been talk now about them returning to Bradford. Whether that'll happen now that they're not in Super League, I don't know. We'll have to see. there were far too many issues for me that they had to sort out to be looked at as a credible bid. But hopefully it's a statement of saying, you know, we're trying to sort ourselves out because we want to be back in the big time. And I think most of us would welcome Bradford back in the top flight.
I don't think anyone would no one would dispute that a good Bradford is good for rugby league. I don't think anyone would deny that.
Yeah, I think we'd all like to see that. And, you know, I think it's even money now on whether they go back to Bradford next year. In fact, I'd say probably 60-40 in favour of them returning to Odsal. The really interesting thing is, I mean, what Gareth said is quite fascinating about Bradford. And I agree with you, Gareth, that Nigel Wood does need now to get much more, you know, to have a bigger profile as the owner of the club. And I think he will do, because he finished as the chief executive of International Rugby League on the 30th of November. And so now his main stake in Rugby League is with Bradford Bulls. And I think Nigel is a pretty determined character that, you know, his ownership of Bradford Bulls is not going to be characterised by some of the same problems that previous owners have had, and hopefully it won't be. And it would be great to see them back at Odsal. Actually, it's quite interesting, isn't it, to think of all these 6 clubs. Several of them have got new grounds. York, we've talked about their new stadium. Toulouse moving into Stade Ernest Wallon in the city of Toulouse to share with the Toulouse Rugby Union Club. And London Broncos, it now looks pretty certain that they're going to be sharing plough lane with Wimbledon Football Club. You know, so maybe a few Super League clubs could take a bit of a tip from the Championship clubs about getting new grounds. You know, there are at least a couple of, obviously, that need them. So, you know, it's been really beneficial, this process, I think, for these 6 clubs. And, you know, it's a process that, you know, I think at the end of the day, every club ought to probably go through every year or every couple of years to sort of assess its position in the rugby league landscape and you know, look to creating a plan to move forward.
Well, the club that I actually feel sorry for is Featherstone in all of this. I think they've been dealt a bit of an unfair hand in that, okay, they're criticised for the geography. Well, they can't help that. They can't help that there's 2 other clubs in the city of Wakefield in Super League. That isn't their fault. I'd argue that they've probably got the best ground in Wakefield anyway. And they seem to get associated with the flat cap mentality. The flat caps banded around as a derogatory term now, isn't it? And I know that historically their fans wear flat caps, and maybe that's where it comes from. But I actually think they're a progressive club. They were one of the most vocal supporters of Toronto throughout their existence. They've done a lot in media and marketing and social media, much more than some other clubs do. They do a lot of things right off the pitch. Yes, there are some faults. I know there's been crowd trouble and the like over the years. It seems to me that no one really ever considered them as a viable option for reasons that are out of their control.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and they're one of these clubs that I always raise this point of, you know, we'll take Castleford and Wakefield just because of the geography of them, but if you gave Featherstone the central funding that Castle and Wakefield have had over the last 25 years, would they have done any worse than Wakefield or Castleford with that? Or, you know, you can argue that with a lot of clubs in the Championship that have potential. And Featherstone, without having that vast central funding, have massively improved their ground. You know, literally built their own stand with guys who used to play for the club. Brilliant story, and they're still embedded in their local community. So, you know, I agree with a lot of the points you make, Matt. And I understand people's criticisms as well that say, you know, if you put Featherstone in, a quarter of the competition would have the same postcode. I think that's a line that people troll out. But that's not Featherstone's fault, is it? They're doing their best, you know, under their situations. And they have come on, you could argue they've made more progress off the field than some of those Super League clubs in the summer era.
Well, Matthew, you said that Featherstone have probably got the best stadium of all the 3 clubs in the Wakefield district. There's absolutely no probably about it. You know, they definitely do have the best stadium. But it's interesting, you know, they built that stand at the end of the stadium during the time when we had licensing, when they couldn't get promoted. So they actually spent a bit of money sorting out and improving their ground, which was, I thought, quite interesting. I think Featherstone are one of the great iconic clubs of rugby league. They're a club that's always punched way above their weight. I mean, the population of Featherstone is about 15,000 or thereabouts. And if I'm honest about it, I don't think that should definitely disqualify them from ever being in Super League, because, you know, I can think of a town in the United States called Clemson in South Carolina, which also has a population of 15,000, which is much more isolated than Featherstone is from neighbouring towns, and the average crowd that they get for the Clemson University college football team is 80,000. So, you know, just because a town has a small population doesn't mean they can't draw a big crowd from miles around. And you know, I think but again, I come back to the point that I think it's better for Featherstone to be in the Championship next year than it would have been to be in Super League, because there'll be a much more competitive outfit, and some of these teams are, you know, I think I'm really looking forward to some great crowds next year in the Championship. You know, York coming to Featherstone travelling to York, travelling to Newcastle. I think Newcastle, as I say, we've not really talked about them coming into the Championship, but I think they're going to be a tremendous addition to the competition. And again, very determined not to go straight back down again to League One, and I don't think they will. So, you know, there's a lot to look forward to, in my view.
London Broncos, Paul. Obviously, it's exciting to me that they might be moving grounds. I mean, Plough Lane, that facility looks tremendous, and the right size for them, I'd argue, just under 10,000 capacity. Was it the right thing for them to be kept away from another stint in Super League for the time being?
Possibly. I don't know. I think the biggest problem London faced is that how could you really justify bringing London Broncos into Super League when you've just got rid of Toronto on the basis that there's no real market there for the sport, it's expansion too far. You know, London's proven to be a very small market for rugby league, and yeah, it's an important outpost. It does many great things for us in terms of player development. I think it's important that we have a professional club there, and I'd love there to be London Broncos back in Super League and attracting decent crowds, but it hasn't happened in the past. So I don't think that you could have credibly put them in on the franchise basis. Now, if they're to get promoted again, hopefully they can have a good crack at it. And like you say, the new stadium at Plough Lane might suit them. Hopefully, they just want a home, I think, more than anything. Just stay somewhere for a length of time would be beneficial for them, because they've been so nomadic that it's very difficult to develop a local community around you to support you. Because it's all right saying you're appealing to the whole of London, but realistically, you know, with your travel times involved in getting across the city and supporting teams around there, you want to sort of base yourself in the local community in a certain part of London. So I hope they stay there if they do move to Plough Lane and base themselves there for a long time. I feel bad for David Hughes, because he's so dedicated and he's thrown so much money at it over the years. But I don't think you could realistically have said that London Broncos would have been an asset to Super League in the way that, you know, Toronto weren't.
It comes back to image, doesn't it? Does Gareth Super League need London? Does it need York, another big city? Does it need, you can name anywhere you want? Does in the long term it need those cities, those big names in the competition, or is it okay to, I don't want to say to be content, but is it okay for it to be filled with teams based on the M62?
Well, it needs those clubs if they're strong entities and are fulfilling their potential. You know, I love the idea of having a strong London Broncos, and they've done so much good with junior development work over the past few years. That club's had a huge amount of money pumped into it over the course of the summer era, both through central funding and David Hughes' fantastic generosity. And even the last time in Super League, they were great to watch and stuff. You know, they were struggling to get over four-figure crowds sometimes. And it's a difficult argument to say that, you know, just having a London team in them brings so much more than a team maybe up here that can attract 8,000-9,000 like Leigh might do next year. It's a tough argument, and there are many levels to it. Of course, we'd love to have a strong London Broncos playing in front of 10,000. And when you look back to those early summer days and they were playing at the Valley, and we got those kind of figures, and even when they were playing at the Stoop at the times, and when they beat Canberra Raiders, you know, that potential looked to be starting to be fulfilled. And for whatever reason, you know, and there have been many reasons, 20 years down the line, they're playing in front of a relative handful of people in Super League at Trailfinders of London people. And it's a tough, you know, I'm not a Londoner. I've never lived there. Geographically, it's got its own challenges. Whereas players, you know, might travel 2 hours to training that live in the city. It's a very unique situation. It has a million different levels to why it's not quite worked. Of course, we want a strong London Broncos. But do you want to say we absolutely have to have a team with the name London on it if it's not fulfilling what somebody else might? I'm not so sure.
So the perennial question, I'll come to you first, Paul. How do we get clubs like London, like Newcastle, say, for argument's sake, how do we ensure that they can be successful, be big, be viable in the upper echelons of Super League in the long term?
Glad you came
Good
to
luck.
me.
Good luck.
That one. I'm not. My first instinct is to say that I'm not sure that we can. The way we have to do that, the only way we could do that really is through money, which means more money going into the Championship. And actually, what's the real situation is going to be less money going to the Championship, if nothing at all come next year. So I don't know if we can, unless they have an owner who's willing to, you know, put their hand in their pocket and fund them to get in there. And once they get in there and have central distributions come in, then I think they can make a go of it, building on some of the great things they've done already. You know, it's in terms of expansion and what's realistic and what's not. Newcastle and York are certainly examples of what seems to be sensible and realistic expansion, and a lot of good work's been done at all levels in both those cities for quite a while now. So I would hope that we can build on those things, but ultimately it will come down to funding for the lower divisions, so that these clubs that we're all talking about now, and you know, the likes of Newcastle as well, have, you know, the funding there to become better, to put themselves in a position whereby they can be competitive in Super League, were they to get promoted. But unfortunately, the game seems to be going the other way, where the money is being consolidated for the top level. So the answer to your question, Matt, is I have no idea.
What a wonderful positive image that dissolves the future of rugby league. Martyn, try and put a more positive outlook on it, please. It's nearly Christmas. We all need to be cheerful.
In my view, for as long as you've got promotion and relegation, it's difficult to guarantee, you know, that you'll get any particular clubs in Super League, because, you know, if you want London Broncos in Super League and you want Newcastle in and you want York in and so on, it's perfectly rational to, and you want Toulouse, for example, and I would have wanted Toronto to still be there. It's perfectly rational to have those desires, but you can only guarantee it if you have some sort of a return to a licensing type system. I think that's probably unlikely. Although you never know, because if private equity finance comes into Super League and takes a 51% stake in the competition, they will then dictate how the competition is going to be organised. So, you know, we might then move on to a more licensing type system. Who knows? It's an unknown quantity.
The problem with licensing, though, Martyn, right? Okay, I am begrudgingly coming round to the idea that we may or may not have to go back to licensing. But I have two major concerns with it. One is the fact that the first time it was implemented, it was woefully executed and was it was a disaster. I will not have anyone tell me otherwise. It was an absolute disaster. Why do we think it'll run better this time? And the second one is the obvious question: how do you bill it to clubs who aren't going to be selected to go into Super League? How do you try and promote, to, off the top of my head, a Widnes Vikings, a Halifax, maybe even a Featherstone, and clubs like that? What are you selling to them? What do you sell?
Well, let me answer that, because, you know, you've got to separate the two issues of promotion and relegation. Relegation is disastrous for clubs from Super League. If you're a club that gets relegated from Super League and you don't have an owner like Ken Davey or someone like that who can actually finance a stay in the Championship, then the club is wrecked. The club is it's a club wrecker, is relegation. On the other hand, promotion is a tremendously positive thing for clubs. So what I would like to see is a system whereby we perhaps did have licensing, but where we did give clubs who won the Championship Grand Final the right to be promoted into Super League, even if that means expanding Super League to 13 clubs, 14 clubs, 15 clubs and 16 clubs. Because I take the point very seriously that clubs who are not in Super League have ambitions like Leigh, like York and all these 6 clubs that have just gone through this process. They have genuine ambitions to be in Super League. And who's to stop them from having those ambitions? That was the problem last time, that we had no flexibility whatsoever in the licensing system. And then when Widnes were brought into Super League, they were brought in without having to win the championship, which I thought was absolutely ridiculous. Widnes found out halfway through a season that they were going to be in Super League the following year, and then they more or less just stopped playing. They stopped trying to win the championship competition, which was it was a terrible reflection on the game at that time. If they'd said, you can come into Super League, but you've got to win the competition, that would have been a wholly different situation. So I think it was very badly organised, badly thought through, and hopefully the game might have learnt from its previous mistakes.
Gareth, licensing, yes or no?
Oh, there's a question. I've always been a staunch promotion and relegation man. I've had many conversations with Martyn down the years, I think, where I've said how I believe sport should be decided on the field. And I'm still towards that, but I must admit there are elements of licensing. If you're thinking about the long-term growth of the game, that I can see the benefits in this process for these clubs. Even my boyhood club was Rochdale Hornets, and their application to go into the Championship. Again, I just think it's generated positivity because it makes the clubs look at themselves, see what they're doing well, look at where they need to improve, communicate to people what we're doing well, say, look, we're in the community, we're going into schools. Rugby League struggles with doing that a lot, and perhaps, that would help that. But there are a few issues with licensing. One of the biggest ones last time was you've got the 12 clubs at the top table receiving your £1.8 million a year. And I think at the time, clubs in the NFP or League One at different times got about £100,000 worth of central funding a year. And you were expecting those to compete against the Super League clubs for a licence. It's a near impossible task. So it was definitely a flawed system. It was definitely implemented poorly. Could it work if it was better executed? I'm more of the thought now that it might be able to than I've ever done. And I am a promotion and relegation man. I always think that we're all involved in sport. You go to watch sport because of what happens on the field, not because of what 7 people in suits sat around the table decide. But I can see more and more the benefits if we want to get into new areas and grow and give clubs a chance of growing on and off the field when they get up to that top table.
Disparity in funding. I've never heard of that before in Rugby League.
Well, my big thing always at the time was I wished as a sport we would have invested heavily in the second tier and made it somewhere where you could have full-time clubs so that relegation wasn't the disaster and that you had that bridge between part-time and full-time. And it's just not happened, has it? To be fair to Super League, the last time they shared the money out, it was more equal. And you were getting clubs in the second tier with a parachute payment getting more like 750 grand. But it still probably made that bridge too far. And either way, with promotion and relegation on the field or through a licensing system, if you've got that massive gap in funding between the first and the second tier, the odds will always be stacked against the clubs in the second tier. And there are clubs at that level that have the potential to be bigger than the clubs at the top table. We're not a sport that has 12 super clubs that are miles better than everybody else. Far from it, I think.
That's absolutely right. I think there's plenty of clubs, and including the ones who were in this process, who could easily just swap places with a few clubs in Super League, and there'll be no difference to Super League. It's just that they're unlucky with the timing, or some were caught outside Super League at the time that licensing was brought in the first time. I've been slightly the opposite of Gareth. That I've always really been in favour of licensing, just from a pragmatic level. I don't know how promotion and relegation is properly sustainable when you've got a part-time competition and a full-time competition. And the best solution to that, of course, would be, as Gareth said, I think as I've said, more investment into the Championship. But where's the money come from? We just don't have the money, do we? I tell you what, if the NRL came in and bought 51% of Super League, we'd have licensing tomorrow. You know, like they won't mess about, because I think if you've been dispassionate about it, it will be the best way to run the league, and that's the decision they would take. But of course, we over here have these emotional attachments to these brilliant clubs outside Super League currently, and we don't want, you know, we want to preserve them, and we want them to have the chance to be in Super League as well. And obviously, sporting culture over here, football mostly, is that promotion relegation is a thing and always has been, and always should be. But is it practical? It's really difficult either way. There's good arguments both ways. I think you touched on it, Matt. There's going to be massive discontent amongst certain clubs if you were to bring back licensing. More than anything, I'm just sick of changing the way that we decide this. You know, just a bit of stability for a while would be nice.
I think a lot of people's issues with licensing when it was happened is that you didn't have that dispassionate decision at the start when you set off and pick your 12 clubs. Right. It was almost like those 12 that are luckily enough to historically be at the top table at the time got the places. And then you'll have people outside of it saying, well, you look at their stadium there, how have they been picked as one of the 12 strongest clubs? I think the only way, if you were going to go back to it, is maybe, and I don't think this NRL thing will happen, but say they did invest in it and they come in and have a blank sheet of paper and say, there's your 12 strongest clubs. It would upset a few of those currently at the top table, but that might be the only way you implement that system.
Yeah, agreed. Right, I think that's a nice place to wrap up. It's been good to chat, gentlemen. We've had plenty of interesting topics. I can't wait for the discussion on licensing to appear on social media. Our views will be coming in its bucket loads, no doubt. Thank you to all of you for joining me. We'll try and catch up again at some point before the season. Plenty to talk about, no doubt, as Super League and Championship comes rolling in. But till then, enjoy your Christmas, enjoy your New Year, and enjoy your Rugby League. Take care.